The street-level superhero is probably one of the harder to define but more relatable heroes roaming around comicdom. Because of that, there are a lot of street-level heroes that you might not have ever seen before. And today on Top 10 Nerd, I'm going to tell you about 10 of them. Number 10, Blindspot. Appearing for the first time in all new, all different Point One, Number 1 from October 2015, Sam Chung was born in rural China, growing up to become an excellent gymnast before his mother eventually illegally brought Sam and herself to the United States. While Sam hadn't really received any formal schooling, he was a genius, and at the age of 12, he had already started putting together blueprints for an invisibility suit. In adulthood, Sam would work as a university janitor, which put him in a perfect place to develop his genius intellect. He would convince professors to let him audit their classes and use their labs in the middle of the night, which is where he finished his invisibility suit. Deciding that his status as an illegal immigrant would harm him if he tried to patent the suit, he decided to instead put it to use as a vigilante, protecting the streets of Chinatown as a hero called Blindspot. While out on patrol one night, he ran into Daredevil fighting thugs in Hell's Kitchen and decided to seek out Daredevil as his vigilante mentor. Number 9, Cheshire Cat. Leon Harper is actually the child of another street-level hero, the former sidekick to Green Arrow, Roy Harper, aka Speedy, aka Red Arrow, aka Arsenal, aka the guy who has a lot of names, and a lot of problems. A large part of those problems is that Roy lost Leon when she was a thinking her to be removed from life at the hands of the villains Prometheus and the Electrocutioner. In reality though, Leon had somehow survived, but was suffering from amnesia. Her earliest ever memory is being rescued from a band of ninjas by the sometimes hero, usually villain known as Cheshire. Now Cheshire then abandoned Leon on the steps of a church, and then years later, having grown a little bit, Leon went by the name Shoes and joined the Alleytown Strays, which is a group of street kids in Gotham's Alleytown area. They survived as thieves living in an old building which had once been the headquarters of Mama Fortuna. Now eventually, Catwoman arrived and announced that she had bought the building and intended to turn the Strays into a gang of thieves under her own leadership. The Strays helped Catwoman to bring down the organized crime groups operating in Alleytown and become the Queen of Alleytown. Now Shoes, or Leon, decided to become an amateur vigilante in Alleytown, taking the name Cheshire Cat and wearing a homemade mask based on Cheshire's own look, with Catwoman taking her on as a protege. Eventually, Leon would reunite with her dad and join the Team Arrow. Number 8, Night Thrasher. Dwayne Taylor grew up believing that his incredibly rich parents were soft-deleted by criminals, and so Dwayne made a vow to make all criminals pay for their crimes. Yes, you probably have heard an origin very similar to that one before. Now Dwayne's guardians, Sergeant Cord and the elderly housekeeper Ty, supported Dwayne in his vow and helped him create the identity of Night Thrasher. After doing some hardcore training, on his first outing, he met two sibling vigilantes named Midnight's Fire and Silhouette, who were taking out criminals by gaining their confidence and then betraying and busting them. After joining the pair one night while Silhouette was infiltrating a criminal operation, the police showed up out of nowhere and it became an extremely tense situation, with Midnight's Fire terrified that the police were going to attack his sister. So he went to attack with a throwing knife instead. That is when Night Thrasher stopped him, leading to a shootout. Now during the altercation, Silhouette was hit and badly injured in the spine, almost taking her life. For this, Midnight's Fire swore to get revenge on Night Thrasher, who had left the group thinking that Silhouette, who he had fallen in love with by the way, had passed away. Now after that, Dwayne trained even harder, and using his parents' resources and foundation, Dwayne, which sounds a lot like Wayne, got access to state-of-the-art headquarters, training facilities, and computer support systems, while also developing specialized armor and weaponry. Recruiting several young heroes, Dwayne eventually formed the New Warriors, and from there, he has only grown. Recently, we learned that Night Thrasher is actually going to be getting his own new solo series, and I will absolutely be reading that. Number 7, Wildcat. First ever appearing in the back pages of the very first issue of Sensation Comics from 1942, which also contained the premiere of Wonder Woman, the original Mr. Terrific, and the Atom, Ted Grant is one of the world's best hand-to-hand fighters, particularly when it comes to boxing, being the one to train several other DC fighters, including Batman himself. Now Ted's dad, Henry Grant, was a good guy, but also a bit of a pushover and a bit of a risk taker. He took it upon himself to make sure that Ted would could never be taken advantage of like he was, and so Henry taught Ted how to box. He had taught and trained him so well that Ted became a Wildcat in the ring. Now unfortunately, Henry was pretty broke due to poor life choices, and so he was unable to put Ted through college. Instead, Ted had to take unloading jobs in the East End warehouse district. This is where one of the warehouse unloaders was being ambushed by a couple of thugs, and using his skills with boxing, Ted fights off the thugs, reading each thug's move before they make it. This unloader just happened to be an old boxer, and he brought Ted into the professional boxing world where he would be framed for taking a life. Ah, scary. He then took on the vigilante name Wildcat in order to clear himself, and eventually joined the Justice Society of America, training heroes, fighting crime, and even eventually gaining 9 lives. I don't know how that happened, but there you go. Number 6, Thunderstrike. Okay, before people get up in arms, I'm going to be talking about specifically the second Thunderstrike here. The original Thunderstrike was a guy named Eric Masterson, and through his time with Thunderstrike, he eventually merged with Thor in the late 80s before fully taking up the Thor mantle in the early 90s, and then eventually getting his own hammer and becoming Thunderstrike. Now Eric had a son, Kevin Masterson, but unfortunately due to Eric being increasingly involved with Thor and gods and supervillains, he began to lack in the father department, and so Kevin went to live with his mom and stepdad. Now eventually Eric passed away after being possessed by the Blood Axe and fighting the Egyptian god and villain known as Seth, and his Thunderstrike mace was then taken by the Avengers, and eventually it was given to Eric by Captain America himself. Now given the Asgardian nature of his superhero origins, Thunderstrike isn't exactly a street level hero, but this is one of the reasons I love his character. He feels very street level, and I've seen him listed as a street level hero before, but Kevin has also been a part of the Asgardians of the Galaxy, and he teamed up with the mighty Avengers, but several street level heroes have done the same thing, so I'm curious to know how you guys would classify him. Number 5, the Creeper. Usually when people think of Gotham City heroes, it's immediately Batman and his Bat family, and even though it seems like they are the only ones around here, there are a few other characters. Creeper is one of them. Jack Ryder was an outspoken television reporter for a Gotham City TV station, with the premise of his show being that he deliberately antagonizes his guests in order to raise attention on important topics like stem cell research and medical nanotech. It was when he began research on the revolutionary nanocells therapy of one Dr. Vincent Yates that Ryder discovered an experimental mixture that allowed the body to regenerate from practically any injury of any kind. Ryder was caught by mobsters when he attempted to steal this experimental mixture, and unable to escape, Dr. Yates injected his last sample of these nanocells into Jack Ryder himself as an attempt to keep it safe from the mobsters. Almost immediately afterwards, the mobsters grabbed Ryder and brought him to the pearly gates. However, the regenerative substance of the nanocells kicked in, interacting with his body chemistry and resurrecting him as the Creeper, a beast-like alter ego. He would defeat the villains and go on to team up with Batman and become a Justice League reservist. Number 4, Sleepwalker. Another street-level hero whose powers and origins could kind of raise him out of that classification if you want to be a stickler about it. Sleeper is part of a group called the Sleepwalkers, who are basically dream police. These entities would go around apprehending any beings that decided to invade the sleeping minds of humans. The one who would become Sleepwalker was tricked by his longtime foe, known as Cobweb, into entering the mind of a New York college student named Rick Sheridan, where Sleepwalker then became trapped. After Rick and Sleepwalker confronted each other a few times inside of Rick's own dreams, which I have to imagine is insanely trippy and terrifying, Rick reacted pretty poorly when he tore off Sleepwalker's Imaginator. Now, an Imaginator is basically a badge-like device worn by Sleepwalkers to teleport around their home plane, the Mindscape. This basically tied Rick and Sleepwalker even more together than ever before. Now, whenever Rick slept, Sleepwalker could materialize into reality, or he could stay in Rick's mind and hang out with him. While hanging out in those said dreams, Sleepwalker was able to convince Rick that he was not some kind of evildoer, and they worked out an agreeable terms to cohabitation together, in Rick's own mind. As a weirdly dream-based street-level hero, Sleepwalker had a really unique and rather silly rogues gallery, including 8-Ball, who literally wore a giant 8-ball and used billiards-based equipment, which is hilarious. There was also the ultra-nerdy Bookworm, who was able to manifest physical representations of any written material, which is so cool. And then there was also Lullaby, who could put people to sleep and control them by singing. Number 3, Jack in the Box. The Astro City comic is one I know I never really talk about, but it boasts a roster of beloved superheroes, with one of the most intriguing being the clown-based hero Jack-in-the-Box. Now normally, clowns are playing the role of villains in comics because they're terrifying. Thanks mainly to the Joker though, I would say. In that regard, Jack-in-the-Box is a bit of a breath of fresh air. Inspired by other acrobatic street-level heroes, Jack-in-the-Box is actually the alter ego of Jack Johnson, an African-American toy designer for Whamco Toys. Now Jack had considerable talent but was only paid half the salary of his less productive white co-workers. His toys were actually so successful that they, for some reason, began to be used by the mob to attack people. Now this got Jack fired and even led to his father being kidnapped, which is when Jack created his Jack-in-the-Box persona to fight back. Using almost cartoony gadgets like spring-loaded catapults built into his gloves and boots to help him get around and fight using agility, confetti streamers that tangle up and or capture bad guys, and electric clown noses, Jack took on both the mob and his own corrupt ex-employers until he tragically passed away, leaving his son Zachary to fill in the role until he hung up his superhero clown shoes, passing the mantle to his protege, Roscoe James. Number 2. Shroud. Similar to Night Thrasher from earlier on this list, and several other heroes who have a thing for beating up criminals in the night, Max Coleridge lost both of his parents right in front of him at the age of 10, leading him to dedicate his life to combating crime. But instead of using insane amounts of wealth to dress up in armor and pointy ears, Max went to law school, trained as an Olympic level athlete, and studied science. It was after graduating that he got really weird. Max joined the mysterious temple called the Cult of Kali, or Kali, where he became a master in a whole bunch of Asian martial arts and in infiltration, but also worshipped their dark goddess. When he had completed his training, Max was surprisingly branded with the Kiss of Kali, with the cult using a red-hot iron in the shape of their symbol on Max's eyes, completely blinding him. But after the pain subsided, Max found that he had been granted a psychic perception that allowed him to see impressions of his environment within a radius of about 100 feet of himself, even through solid walls. And for his very first go at things, he decided to follow the Fantastic Four to Latveria and try to take the life of Dr. Doom, which he actually did fairly well at. But unfortunately, it's Dr. Doom, and Shroud's defeat came pretty soon afterwards and actually drove Shroud insane. After recovering, he went on as a vigilante, fighting alongside other heroes and gaining Dark Force dimension powers and occasionally struggling with his sanity again. Number 1. Colleen Wing. After the death of her mentor, a warrior named Azumi Azawa, Colleen Wing moved to Japan and was trained as a samurai by her grandfather, Kenji Ozawa. Now thanks to a mix of her grandfather's training and her blood flowing through her, Colleen took quickly to her samurai training, which eventually elevated her to become a world-class fighter, performing at the very peak of physical level. After she had completed her training, Colleen moved back to New York City, where she used her abilities to work with her father and as a private investigator, which led her to working with other local street-level heroes, most notably Misty Knight. Over the years, she has co-owned Nightwing Restorations and Daughters of the Dragon with Misty Knight and plays important roles with all the different versions of Heroes for Hire as one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Thank you guys so much for watching today on Top 10 Nerd. I'm Adam Andrews. I will catch you all on the flippy flop. Until then, stay safe and peace out.